You have been deceived. That story you think you know about the serpent in the Garden of Eden is full of errors that many don't even imagine. And the worst part, these errors may be keeping you away from the deep truths of the Bible, harming your faith and leaving you vulnerable to new spiritual deceptions. In this video, I will reveal the 5 biggest mistakes that almost everyone makes when interpreting the story of the serpent in Eden. These mistakes not only distort the true meaning of the passage, but also limit the power that this knowledge can have in your spiritual life. Get ready, because by discovering these errors, you will understand why certain spiritual battles never end, why some prayer requests are not answered, and how a change in your understanding can bring about the transformation you so desperately seek. 1. The Bible never says, "It was an ordinary snake." Many people, when thinking of the serpent in Eden, immediately imagine an ordinary snake, one that slithers along the ground, ready to strike. But the biblical text does not describe the serpent this way. In Genesis 3, the Hebrew term used is nechash, which has a much broader meaning. This word can be translated as shining being or enchanter, suggesting that the serpent in the Garden of Eden was something very different from what we are accustomed to thinking. When we read the passage, we realize that the serpent is not presented as a simple reptile. If it had been an ordinary snake from the beginning, the curse of crawling on your belly would lose its meaning. After all, how could a snake that already slithers be punished to continue slithering? This leads us to reflect, could this creature have had another form before the fall? Some scholars argue that the serpent could have been a much more complex being, perhaps even a spiritual or celestial being that had deviated. Furthermore, the idea of a charming being endowed with hidden knowledge makes sense in the context of the narrative. The Garden of Eden was a place of direct communion between man, God, and the divine creation. The serpent, in some way, stood out among the creatures. And this raises intriguing questions. Was it originally a being that walked? Or perhaps was it a radiant being, whose appearance became an attraction for Eve? The answers are not clear in the text, but the details chosen in the scriptures indicate that it was not an ordinary snake. Another point to consider is the role the serpent plays. It not only speaks, but also deceives with skill. It is not natural for an ordinary animal to have such capabilities. This characteristic suggests that the serpent was an instrument of deception, possibly used by a higher entity. And here is one of the most provocative issues. If it was not an ordinary snake, but a higher being, what motivated its fall? Was it pride, as many believe was the case with Satan? Or was there another factor that led to its transformation? The most fascinating thing is how this story challenges us to go beyond literal interpretations. The details of the text invite us to reflect on the depth of the narrative. Why did the author choose such a polysemous term as nachash? Why was the punishment described in this way? And most importantly, what does this teach us about the relationship between humanity, temptation, and the impact of sin on creation? With this, we see that the serpent in Eden, as described in the Bible, should not be reduced to a mere slithering snake. Its representation is much richer and more enigmatic, inviting us to explore the symbolic and spiritual layers of the biblical narrative. This is just the first of the major mistakes about the serpent in the Garden of Eden. 2. The serpent had intelligence and spoke. In the Genesis account, one of the most surprising characteristics is the serpent's ability to speak and communicate articulately. This is not something expected from an ordinary animal. The serpent not only makes sounds, it argues with Eve, presents a convincing logic, and directly questions what God had said. This ability to reason and persuade is a unique detail that distinguishes it from all the other creatures mentioned in the scriptures. Imagine the scene. Eve is in the garden, surrounded by the beauty of divine creation. Then the serpent approaches, with calculated words and an attitude that conveys knowledge. Its words are not simple declarations. They are provocative questions that awaken doubts. This leads us to ask, how did the serpent acquire such intelligence? Was it created with these capabilities, or was it influenced by an external force, as many believe to be the case with Satan? The biblical text does not provide all the answers, but the fact that the serpent speaks reveals that it was not just any animal. Another fascinating aspect is the logic behind the serpent's speech. It does not try to convince Eve in an obvious or brute manner. On the contrary, its words are subtly manipulative. It suggests that God is hiding something, that eating the forbidden fruit will open Eve's and Adam's eyes, making them like God. This strategy shows a deep understanding of human nature, the quest for wisdom, power, and autonomy. Thus, the serpent is not just any voice. It is a voice that understands and exploits the most intimate desires of the human heart. Unlike other animals, which act on instinct, the serpent in Eden demonstrates a capacity for planning and persuasion. This raises a crucial question. Was it merely a vehicle for another, more powerful entity, or was its very nature exceptional and mysterious from the outset? The Bible does not give us a direct answer, but it leads us to consider the possibility that this creature had a specific purpose in the story of the fall, something beyond what a mere animal would be capable of. It is interesting to note that, throughout the biblical narrative, there is no other animal portrayed with the same characteristics as the serpent in Eden. Not even the donkey that spoke to Balaam in Numbers 22, 28, 30 is described with such intelligence and persuasion. The serpent is, therefore, a unique and enigmatic case. Its ability to speak and reason leads us to reconsider what we know about creation and the role of creatures in God's plan. Finally, the idea of a talking serpent is so intriguing that it continues to fascinate scholars, theologians, and readers through the centuries. Its intelligence and eloquence transformed the narrative of the Garden of Eden into much more than a simple story of temptation. It is a powerful reminder of how deception can arise from the least expected places, and how we need to be attentive to the influences that shape our spiritual and moral choices. 3. Many believe that the serpent was Satan, but the Bible does not confirm it. A widely held idea is that the serpent in the Garden of Eden was Satan himself in disguise. This notion is so popular that many treat it as an established fact. However, when we read Genesis 3 closely, we notice that the text never states this directly. The Bible presents the serpent as a cunning and deceptive being, but its exact identity is not specified. This invites us to take a closer look at the connection between the serpent and Satan, which only clearly appears in later texts. In Revelation 12:9 and 22, the Apostle John describes Satan as the ancient serpent. These verses are the basis for the interpretation that the serpent in Eden was Satan. However, there is a long interval between Genesis and Revelation. During that period, the biblical texts do not make a direct link between the garden serpent and the devil. This gap raises an important question. Was the serpent literally Satan, or was it an agent of his? Perhaps it was a deceived or controlled creature rather than God's arch-enemy himself. Either way, it is undeniable that the serpent played a crucial role in Satan's plan to corrupt humanity. The deception it practiced was the gateway to sin and the separation of man from God. But it is interesting to note that the author of Genesis limits himself to describing the events without directly attributing the figure of the serpent to the devil. This could suggest that the serpent, although cunning and possibly used by Satan, was not necessarily his physical manifestation. Moreover, the symbolism of the serpent as deception and temptation was already common in various ancient cultures. In the Hebrew scriptures, the serpent also symbolizes danger, deceit, and death. In Numbers 21:6, for example, the fiery serpents sent to punish the people of Israel are a representation of divine judgment. However, these serpents are not Satan. Similarly, it is possible that the serpent in Eden functions as a powerful symbol or metaphor, even if it is not directly identified with Satan in the original text. Even so, the association of the serpent with Satan in later books, such as Revelation, helps build a broader theology about evil and temptation. Even though Genesis does not confirm that the serpent was Satan, Christian interpretation over the centuries has been shaped by that connection. This shows how the reading of the Bible evolves and how older texts are reinterpreted in light of new revelations and theological contexts. Therefore, while it is tempting to state that the serpent was Satan in disguise, it is important to recognize that the Bible does not make that statement explicitly in Genesis. This invites us to reflect on the complexity of the scriptures and the richness of their symbolism. Instead of seeking definitive conclusions, we can learn from the nuances of the text and consider the serpent as an agent of deception whose actions revealed human vulnerabilities and the need for divine redemption. 4. The curse on the serpent might have changed its original form. After the episode of sin in Eden, God pronounces a sentence upon the serpent that seems to indicate a transformation in its form or mode of locomotion. In the text of Genesis 3:14, he declares, "You will crawl on your belly, and you will eat dust all the days of your life." This statement suggests that before the curse, the serpent had another way of moving, something different from slithering. This enigmatic detail raises many questions about the true nature of this creature before the fall. Imagine for a moment that the serpent was not originally a crawling animal. What then was it? Some scholars speculate that it might have had legs or some form of upright movement. Others suggest that the serpent may have been a creature with angelic characteristics, perhaps a shining or radiant being. The transformation described in Genesis 3:14 would then mark a degradation of its original form. This leads us to reflect on the impact of sin, not only on humanity, but also on the very creatures involved in the event. Another possible interpretation is that the serpent, before the fall, was not exactly a reptile. The use of the Hebrew term nachash already raises this possibility, as its various connotations include the idea of a charming or enlightened being. If the serpent was indeed something higher, the divine curse would be a drastic demotion. It is almost as if God was saying, "You who were in an elevated position now will be humbled and reduced to the lowest condition among creatures." This echoes the fall of other beings in the biblical account, such as the angels who lost their original glory. Yet the question remains, if the serpent already crawled before, what is the meaning of the curse? This detail suggests that something changed. The punishment of crawling on your belly implies that there was previously another mode of locomotion, something that conferred a certain dignity to the creature. What we see here is a reconfiguration of the serpent, a transformation that aligns it with its new symbolic role of degradation and deception. This also reflects the seriousness of sin. Not only humans, but all of creation suffers the consequences of disobedience. This idea of transforming the serpent's original form also points to how sin affects the natural order. In Romans 8:20-22, Paul writes about how all creation was subjected to futility and awaits redemption. This could include this drastic change in the very nature of the serpent. Before sin, there was harmony and purpose. After the fall, even the serpent loses its original form and becomes a symbol of deception, curse, and separation from God. Therefore, the curse on the serpent is not just an isolated detail. It reflects the profound consequences of sin and helps us understand the seriousness of disobedience to God. This episode leads us to ponder the final restoration, when, according to the scriptures, all creation will be redeemed. Meanwhile, the serpent remains as a visual and symbolic reminder of the consequences of rebellion and the importance of obeying divine commandments. 5. the true symbolic meaning of the serpent. The story of the serpent in the Garden of Eden goes beyond a mere animal that speaks and deceives. Throughout the biblical narrative, the serpent is used as a symbol of temptation, deceit, and rebellion against God. From the very beginning, its appearance carries a symbolic weight that transcends the mere description of an event. This symbolism invites us to reflect on the deeper meaning of the episode and what it teaches us about our own spiritual journey. In the context of the Bible, the serpent appears as a figure that represents turning away from God's will. Its function is not only that of a tempter, but also that of an agent who reveals human frailties. In interacting with Eve, the serpent exposes the human heart's inclination to seek something beyond what God allowed. This representation challenges us to consider how we deal with our own temptations and how we can resist the voices that pull us away from the divine purpose. Furthermore, the serpent carries a symbolic charge in various ancient cultures, which also influences our understanding of the biblical text. In many traditions, the serpent is associated with hidden wisdom, spiritual power, and even life and death. However, in the Eden narrative, it becomes a symbol of deceit, forbidden knowledge, and tragic consequences. This reinterpretation reminds us that not everything that seems attractive or enlightened is truly good for us. It is an invitation to discern, to seek the true wisdom that comes from God, and not to be led astray by what initially appears dazzling. Another important aspect of the serpent's symbolism is its role as a constant reminder of the consequences of sin. When we look at the serpent, we remember the original disobedience, the breaking of communion with God, and the devastating impact this had on creation. It is an image that calls us to repentance and points us to the need for redemption. And that redemption, as the Bible teaches us, can only be found in Jesus Christ. The serpent in Eden makes us reflect on our choices and seek divine grace as a means of restoration. Finally, the serpent also helps us understand the dynamics of the spiritual struggle we face every day. The temptation that Eve faced in the garden is the same temptation we encounter in various forms: the desire to be independent of God, to follow our own paths, and to seek our own wisdom. The symbolism of the serpent warns us of these inclinations and reminds us that even in the face of our weaknesses, God offers us a way back. He gives us the opportunity to trust in His word and follow His plans instead of being drawn in by the lies and deceptions that surround us. In summary, the true symbolic meaning of the serpent is a call to reflection and spiritual growth. It reminds us of the danger of disobedience, the need for discernment, and the power of divine redemption. It is a figure that, even as a symbol of deceit and rebellion, points us toward God's grace and the importance of remaining steadfast in faith, trusting in His word, and resisting the temptations we encounter on our spiritual journey. And you, had you already heard about these 5 mistakes concerning the Serpent of Eden? Leave your opinion in the comments. Share your experience and tell me what caught your attention the most. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell to receive transformative content like this, which helps you grow in faith and in the knowledge of the Word. Oh, and before you go, click on the next video that will appear on the screen and continue your spiritual journey with me. May God bless your life, and see you in the next video.